Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. As we wrap up 2025, we want to touch on a couple of different subjects here. A lot of them are energy related and politically related. And, well, as we've talked about on the podcast before, there are common threads through these whole things. And one of them, of course, a story that we've covered considerably over the last couple of weeks here on the podcast, of course, is Donald Trump's fascination, some would say obsession, with Venezuela. Why is that happening, and what are the implications of that? And to talk about that and a few things, too, because let's face it, Canada is not just an uninterested observer in this whole thing. What happens down there, what happens everywhere is going to have an impact on Canada. And we'll talk about that, too, with our guest. Pleased to welcome back to the podcast our friend Markham Hislop, of course, from Energy Media. Markham, great to have you with us again. Thanks so much for making some time for us today.
Well, Happy New Year, Bill and Madeline. It's always great to have a chat with you. And what better time to do it than New Year's Eve in 2025?
Exactly. It's been an incredible year. There are a lot of adjectives, I guess, we could use about 2025, but it has set the scene for what could happen in 2026. And I think it's probably, I think, left us with this taste in our mouths that, you know what, anything can happen. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And as 2025 certainly showed us, a lot of it is around the orbit of Donald Trump and what he's wanting to do globally and how Canada is going to be impacted by this, too. So let me start off with what I just mentioned about Venezuela. As the old colloquialism says, I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card this year, that all of a sudden Donald Trump was going to be having this fascination with what was happening in Venezuela. However, when we start saying, oh, wait a minute, even in the first administration, Trump showed some interest and fascination with Venezuela, and especially with Venezuelan oil. So I guess when you look at that and the fact that the common thread that we've talked about, and you've mentioned, of course, on your show many times, is when Donald Trump says, yeah, I want Canada to be the 51st state, when Donald Trump says, I want Greenland, when Donald Trump looks at Venezuela, when Donald Trump looks at Nigeria even, the common thread there is minerals and oil. We tend not to think of that. We tend to think of the oil industry and the petroleum industry as Saudi Arabia and Russia and certainly what's happening in North America. But there are other elements, especially critical minerals. And it looks like Trump has this. Now, I don't know if he's got a strategy in this. I'm not so sure that he's developed something like this. But when you look at it in that context, this fascination with Venezuela kind of fits into that pattern, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And in one of your shows, Bill, we talked about the 2025 National Security Strategy, which was released in November. And we can't emphasize enough the importance of that document. So every 4 years, every new president coming in has to have a national security strategy. And generally, these are, whether it's Obama, whether it was Bush, doesn't matter who it is. In the past, they've tended to be these broad multilateral kinds of strategies, with lots of discussion about America's allies and how to build this rules-based global order, especially around trade and so on. That was not the theme of Donald Trump's document. It was all about America first. And it said very clearly that there is the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And that is, if for anybody who doesn't know, in 1823, the United States declared the Monroe Doctrine, which meant that it was a signal to Europe. It was like, look, we're done with European wars in North America, and don't come into Canada, don't come into the U.S. Europe, stay over in Europe, and essentially that was the message. But over the years, it was reinterpreted to mean America's dominance of the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And so for many, many decades, Latin America was considered the backyard of the United States. And Canada was the front yard, but because we were a democracy and because we had this close trading relationship with the U.S., nobody bothered with the front yard. We were fine, and we had a very close working relationship, and so we weren't a problem. Well, what Trump has now said is that we're reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, and it both the backyard and the front yard are going to be looked at as kind of hinterlands of raw materials for the United States industry. And Trump wants to reinvigorate manufacturing in the United States. And that means critical minerals. It means oil. It means, timber, anything raw materials. And so he's going back to this old, century or more idea of Canada as just a supplier of raw materials. And he wants to take, I think very clearly, you see it in the auto sector in Ontario, he wants that industry back in the United States. And what he looks for from Canada are things like raw oil, raw gas, raw logs, raw whatever, critical
Yeah.
minerals. That's the role that he sees Canada playing, as he does Venezuela. And so what we see, because we started off this conversation with Venezuela. The way I view his conflict with Venezuela, what he's doing down there with the naval blockade, is Trump asserting American dominance in the Caribbean, in Latin America. That's the primary goal. I don't think it's about oil so much, because over the last 10, 15 years, the oil infrastructure has deteriorated. 70% of it now is just unusable. Venezuela produces about 700,000 to 900,000 barrels a day of heavy crude that actually competes with Alberta heavy crude.
Yeah.
But even if the United States, if they effected regime change, new government, we're going to increase oil, it would take years and years to rebuild that infrastructure and get Venezuela back up to the 2.6 million
But
barrels
with
a
that
day.
in mind, and I've seen that, of course, you've talked about those numbers and the state of the industry there right now. Why are the American oil companies so fascinated with it? I mean, and Trump's brought this up a few times. They booted us out. They stole our land. It's in Venezuela, for God's sakes, Trump. And they were compensated. Now you can argue that, well, they didn't get as much as they wanted. Well, who does? When there's a negotiation, you never do. But they want back in there, and Trump wants back in there too. Now, mind you, this is the same guy that wants to bring coal back, and talk about that. And so, he seems to be on a different plane than the rest of the world these days. But it's the United States. And no matter how crazy this guy sounds, you got to listen to him when he starts saying about this, because he may follow this up with action like he seems to be doing now with Venezuela.
Well, remember that early in his, after inauguration, he declared his energy dominance doctrine. And so, because the U.S. is the world's largest oil producer at about it's about 11 million barrels a day, and the world's largest LNG producer, he was intended to use that as leverage in trade talks, which he's done everywhere he goes. He doesn't want multilateral trade agreements. He wants bilateral trade agreements with the U.S. and whatever country is in question, and he uses access to energy as one of his leverage points. And everybody knows that Trump is transactional. He has to come out of negotiations with a win. And so he's used that as, forcing countries like with Japan, to take American LNG. And so within that context, you can see that he's asserting U.S. dominance over a significant energy source, oil source, in his backyard. And where does Venezuelan oil go? Well, a lot of it goes to China.
How are they
And
going to respond to that, though? That's an interesting point. Trump is basically trying to exert his dominance over what's happening in Venezuela right now with the industry, despite the shape it's in right now. China's got to be looking at us. Hey, wait a second here. Now, I know, as we've talked about, China is weaning off of fossil fuels, and they've done an incredible job that really doesn't get the attention it probably deserves. But by the same token, they're saying, just a second, buddy, you're messing with something that we need, and for now, we may not need it yet next year, but right now we need that stuff. Back off. I mean, is there a possibility here that China may start pushing back if the United States tries to exert that influence in Venezuela?
one of the things the Chinese have done over the last over 2025 is fill their reserves, their strategic reserves. I mean, for a number of months, the crude oil prices were basically supported by, not by consumption, but by China buying for its reserves. Oil was relatively cheap, and so they filled up their storage. but at the same time, they were buying around. I forget the exact amount they were buying from Venezuela, but they were buying a fair amount because that heavy crude is valued in not only in their refineries but also in their petrochemical plants. But there are other suppliers, and this is an important point: is that a lot of the Saudi production, for example, that was cut back over the last few years, is actually heavy crude. So it's not like there isn't a substitute for it, and frankly, also Canada through Trans Mountain expansion now can also reach Chinese markets, and
Hmm.
it's a high quality crude. So Canada is a kind of a marginal barrel, if you will, in the Chinese market. But the primary relationship when it comes to oil is Russia. And despite the sanctions on Russia, they really have been kind of toothless. And China is thumbing its nose at Trump and building a closer relationship with Putin. And through this, the shadow tanker fleet that they've got, basically Russia has been able to step in and supply whatever China has needed. So China is, when in Trump 1.0, China was caught kind of off guard. It wasn't expecting that aggressive stance or approach from Trump. They're much better prepared this time, and they've got they've got a access to supply through Russia and other Middle Eastern suppliers like Iran and Iraq, they're pushing trade into the global South, which they didn't do during Trump 1.0. So I don't think that China has to push back that hard against Trump. I mean, they've been cut out of many of the American
Yeah.
markets in certain, around chips, semiconductors, and EVs and so on, uh, and they've just found other markets. So there's a school of thought amongst American scholars that says Trump is actually pushing China, sort of other countries into China's embrace, achieving the opposite of what he says he wants to achieve.
Well, including Canada, and we've talked about that in the past too. And the Prime Minister Carney has made those hints too. He's on his way to China, I guess, sometime in 2026. But and again, let's tie it back to the Monroe Doctrine that you referenced in the beginning of the conversation. Americans exerting their influence, especially in North and South America. And to parlay Teddy Roosevelt's interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine, walk softly and carry a big stick. In other words, we're going to exert our dominance. Uh, Trump seems to still think he's got a big stick, that he can leverage anything he wants from whomever he wants because of this energy dominance that they have. Is that stick getting smaller?
I think that he's the exact opposite of Teddy Roosevelt. Uh, he talks loudly and carries a small stick, because invariably when he goes into these negotiations, he comes out with a not even a trade deal. He comes out with like an MOU,
Yeah,
right? Where it's an agreement in principle, and then he brags that this is that he's cut a deal and what a great thing this is for the United States. Remember when he did that with Europe,
yeah,
and Europe was going to, I forget what they were going to invest, $600 billion or something, and then the Europeans were very quick out of the gate to say, oh no, hang on a
yeah,
second, that's not what we meant. This is
yeah.
all in principle, still to be negotiated. That's kind of Trump's mo here. And to be honest, Bill, I talked to trade economists, and they're still not certain what he's doing. And a lot of them aren't even certain what tariffs are on any given day, because this is so fluid and it changes so often, and it's difficult to apply. We think he applies a tariff to Canada. Who collects it? How does it get collected? When
Yeah.
does it get collected? I mean, there are so many of these decisions of his that he signs an executive order. Somebody has to then implement that decision at the border or wherever it is, and that's a lot easier said than done. So I think the word that describes Donald Trump's presidency is uncertainty. And as you know, investors in business absolutely hate uncertainty.
There's another side to him too that's I think coming into play here. Jonathan Karl's last book, when he talked about the Trump campaign, which ultimately resulted in him getting reelected, talked about the well, now we're going to say alleged assassination attempt, I guess. And as Carl reported, he says in the emergency room, Trump's first words were, "How's it playing in the media?" Which some people said, well, this whole thing was a setup, and that's another debate that we could get into another time. But he loves media attention. So when he says, I just signed a deal after an hour and a half talking with EU, all of a sudden he's got a trade deal. Same thing with the UK a couple of months after that. It's the headline that he's going for. He doesn't give a damn about the details, does he? And he doesn't much care if 2 days later they basically deny everything. As long as he got that headline, that seems to be what it's all about. Is that what he's trying to do here in Venezuela? Is it him trying to control the news and he be on the front page? He laps that stuff up. That's of course typical of a narcissist like he is. But at the same time, we can't just be sitting idly by and watching this. It has an impact on global markets. It has an impact on the economy, and even what's going on in or could go on in Venezuela here with this U.S. intervention. That's going to have an impact on Canada. If they're going to take this over, and if American companies are going to get a foothold in Venezuela once again, what does that do to Alberta crude? Did the Americans come back and say, that pipeline, we don't really need it now. We're getting our stuff from south now, and it's going to the Gulf of America, as he calls it, not the Gulf of Mexico, and we'll do the refining there. You guys have a good day. I mean, that could. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's a possibility. And that kind of leaves Danielle Smith high and dry, doesn't it?
Danielle Smith and Alberta are going to get left high and dry anyway, Bill. And this is a mystery to me. Why Canadian economists I understand why Canadian journalists don't do it. Where, as you know, newsrooms are spread awfully thin these days.
Yeah.
There are very few energy reporters, and they don't have the time to do in-depth analysis. But here at Energy Media, we have gone out and found the energy demand modeling from Chinese organizations. So there's 3 main ones that we've looked at: Sinopec, which is the state-owned refiner. China National Petroleum Corporation speaks for itself. And then there's a unit attached to the Peking University. All 3 of them have modeled that based on the trends and policies of the Chinese, the Communist Party, that right now China consumes 17 million barrels of oil a day, and by 2050 that will be between 5.5 and 7.5 million barrels a day, because China is electrifying its transportation sector, and that is 50-60% of all the oil consumed. So the Chinese themselves are saying we are not going to be a major oil consumer 25 years down the road. What is that big pipeline that Danielle Smith wants to build to, Prince Rupert or Kitimat? It's designed to go to China and India and other parts of Asia.
Yeah.
And so China is weaning itself off oil by electrifying. Already we're seeing in the last year and a half, China moving big time into those markets with cheap solar panels and cheap EVs and setting up factories and so on. So the trend is that the biggest market for oil, which is road transportation, is the one that is electrifying the most quickly, and China is pushing it hard into the global south, because if it's electric, China's supplying it. It's supplying the batteries, it's supplying the wind turbines and the solar panels and the EVs and all of that. And it's a geopolitical and national security strategy as much as it is an energy and economic strategy for China. And all of that seems to get, nobody ever talks about it, what's going on in the markets that pipeline is supposed to serve. And right now, with the work that we do and the experts that we interview are saying, A, the trend is for decline in oil consumption, and B, it's increasing uncertainty. Who's going to spend $50 billion on a pipeline in a period of increasing uncertainty?
Let me circle back to the political end of things, for just a second. China, based on what you've been saying here, maybe looking at what Trump's doing in Venezuela or attempting to do there, and simply say, yeah, knock yourselves out if you want, not, but at the same time, China politically is bent on basically asserting itself in the South Pacific, and certainly with India, with other nations. They're trying to take that void. In other words, there's always been this conflict. In the old days, it was just Russia versus the United States. China's a player now, especially in the Southern Hemisphere. is there going to be some resentment there by saying, okay, it's not the oil that we're pissed off about. We don't want you down here. They're trying to move their political influence into South America as they are in Southeast Asia and other parts right now. And there could be some resentment about that, too. In other words, just as the Monroe Doctrine basically states that America is the big dog here, China's trying to assert themselves as the big dog in the Southern Hemisphere. Is that going to cause some headbutting?
Exactly the opposite so far. What's happened
Yeah.
is that thanks to the particularly Trump, but it even started under Biden, China has actually been they call it industrial diplomacy. So China will go into some place like Peru and say, look, you want to build a port. There's this massive port. I forget the name of it. It opened up in 2025. You want to build that port. We want to use that port as an entryway into Latin American economies. We'll come in and we'll pay for 1.5 billion of the $3.5 billion cost. So China brings capital, China brings expertise, China brings exports, cheap Chinese goods, and they see themselves as backfilling the Trump's retreat from those markets. Like you remember,
Yeah.
Trump canceled U.S. aid and a lot of the programs that
Yeah.
were, basically, countries in Latin America and elsewhere relied upon. It's been canceled, and so in places like Asia, in places like Africa, China's influence and its capital investment and its exports are increasing significantly. And the American analysts that I read are talking about how Trump wants to retrench so that basically the United States is the boss of Fortress Western Hemisphere,
Mm-hmm.
and he sees that as his backyard and front yard, and he wants to dominate that. And he's quite happy to allow China to take Africa, Asia, any other markets that they want, and then Russia will basically be the dominant player in Europe and some of the other markets. That's the way apparently Trump sees the world. So what he's done, if that's in fact the case, and it looks like it is he's ceded all the relationships with the growing emerging markets. So we see, for instance, I did a number of interviews with Ember Energy. So what are the energy trends? Where is energy demand going to grow the most between now and 2050? 80% of that growth is coming from Asia. So if China is dominating trade-wise and investment-wise and so on, the biggest source of energy demand growth in the next 25 years, that's an example of their strategy, is to basically make Asia its backyard.
But with that in mind and with that dynamic, and it's as you said, it's been developing for a long time. This is not a new concept. And we've talked about this for the last 25 or 30 years, even going back to my radio show, about the dominance of China and as the largest economy, and the dominance and emergence of India, which is still growing. Trump's turning his back on that. I mean, that's I don't know if it's economic suicide, but it doesn't certainly show any vision. I mean, the potential for the U.S. to have influence in those markets in the future is enormous, and he doesn't seem to care one way or another. We just want to stay right where we are, unless it suits our purpose to go someplace else, for instance, into Venezuela or wherever. And it just seems as if this guy doesn't really have an idea or a concept of what's happening in the world around him.
There is a new world order emerging, and it is along these not quite. There's not three superpowers. Think of it as maybe two superpowers: China and the U.S., and a junior, which would be Russia and its sphere of influence in some of the Middle Eastern countries and so on. And Trump is quite happy to retrench into the Western Hemisphere, and that's bad news for Canada, because now he doesn't like the idea that we're going to be diversifying our markets, building markets in Asia, building markets in Europe. And as the Prime Minister Mark Carney said very famously back in March, the further integration of our two economies is over. It's dead. That is not how Trump sees Canada. as I mentioned earlier, we are basically, this is the Staples thesis all over again.
Yeah.
He wants to reduce us to a supplier of cheap raw materials for U.S. industry, and all of the economic benefits would go to the United States. Doesn't care that we're an ally. Doesn't care that we're, a sophisticated G7 economy. Doesn't care about that. All he cares about is his politics and the United States. I don't know where this is going to go, Bill. There are plenty of analysts that I interview who are trying to read the tea leaves, and you can kind of see some trends emerging. But I think that in 2026, one of the biggest stories will be, what is Trump really up to? What is, are we going to see this some sort of new world order emerge? What are going to be the trade relations going to be like? How much influence or how much latitude will countries like Canada have to be independent before Trump comes in and tries to pressure them back into the American fold? What will happen with China in the global South? All of this it's all in flux right now. And David Coletto, Abacus Data, you
Sure.
probably know
Yeah.
David, has a term for it. It's called precarity. And
Yeah.
precarity is when everybody, the world has kind of come unglued, and it's unstable, and people are just worried about they're worried about their paycheck. They're worried about paying the mortgage, and they haven't got time to worry about, the big global trends and so on. And I think precarity is going to be the state of the world in 2026.
But I read David's essay on that. It's fascinating, really, and it's very thought provoking. But by extension, he says that because of that, people that are being impacted, like you and me, and as citizens of this country, for instance, tend to embrace the status quo because we're afraid of. Oh, I don't want to go to the outside of the edge of the pool here because I don't know what's out there, and I don't know how that's going to impact our country, and I don't know how it's going to impact me. So for politicians that are trying to be progressive and say, we're going to have to take some chances. We have to be bold. I'm not so sure that the population is ready to do that right now because they're a little concerned about, is there a price to pay for this? And that's the concern. Trump's moves. Well, we could talk about the duality of Donald Trump, what he says and what he does, of course, for probably right into 2026 if we wanted to. But the reality here is he's saying, it's America first. He's thinking, all about America. Yet he's got his hands in, I want to be the peacemaker in Ukraine. I'm going to do what I can in Gaza. I want to do what I can. And now he's moved into Nigeria and what happens in Venezuela. But there's an element in every one of those situations where he or the family will benefit from this. In other words, we need to reconstruct Ukraine. Well, guess who's going to get the contracts? Gaza, they want to develop, make that a tourist town with casinos and hotels. Guess who's going to be there? Jared Kushner. There's always a Trump element to this, and that seems to be what he's singularly focused on. But he doesn't seem to look at the big picture and say maybe what we're doing here can have an influence on global economies. That doesn't seem to interest him at all. It's more how can I enrich myself, not how can I enrich America's position in this changing global enterprise.
I think there's a difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0 in that when he went during the first administration, he had a lot of what I would call, sort of credible establishment types in his cabinet and in his administration that kept him, from stretching the guardrails too much.
Yeah.
But he and his team learned, and I think there's Trump, and then there's Trump's team. And, the Stephen Miller, the Steve Bannon, people like that behind the scenes do have a very clear strategy. And they do have a more of a vision of what they want. Trump, as you rightly point out, is a bit of a grifter, right?
Yep.
I mean,
No kidding.
whatever. He's always looking for his taste of any deal that gets done, personally, family wise, for the United States, whatever it is, but there's got to be some kind of a taste. And he's not consistent. And there's a lot of questions about, is he suffering from early dementia already? All that kind of stuff. So looking at Trump and judging the direction of the United States in 2026 and beyond is probably not the best idea. But you can see where his administration wants to go. And we did a lot of work on this starting in September about Trump's idea of ungoverning. So generally when you elect politicians, whether it's at the national level or at the provincial level, you expect that they will govern the machinery of government to best, provide benefits for voters.
Hmm.
And you might be a conservative and you want a little less government. You might want to be a liberal and you want a little more, or maybe you're a new Democrat and you want a lot more government. But the idea is that government is here to serve the people, and that's what the politician does. That is not what Trump is up to. That is not what his team wants. They are very much in of dismantling the U.S. administrative state. That the deep state, as they call it, the bureaucrats. There's 3 million
Well,
federal
that's the old
bureaucrats.
drain the swamp attitude that Trump ran on the first time, isn't it?
Well, it is, but now they're
But
now
yeah,
they're
but they
equipped to
were the
do it.
swamp.
Right.
It's
But
a classic example of that is when when he won re-election this time around. Elon Musk comes in. He gives him a special dispensation. Go and do what you want. Go find savings. He didn't find any savings. What he did is he fired anybody that were providing those guardrails, so that he and his buddies could do whatever they wanted with no oversight at all. I mean, it sounds to me an awful lot. What's happening here, Markham, is the people that are around him in this Trump 2.0 are playing him to a certain extent. And you talked about, Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio, who are key players in this Venezuela situation right now. Marco Rubio has a vested interest in this. And he was, from Cuban immigrants, of course, has a real problem with the government in Cuba, certainly a real problem with the government in Venezuela. He would love to see a regime change there. I don't think Donald Trump gives a damn one way or another, but Rubio is obsessed with this. Stephen Miller wants to basically, well, we all know what his immigration policies are like. If you're not white, he doesn't want you in the United States. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. He tried to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador and was successful in that until the Supreme Court said you can't do that because you can't do that if you're not in a state of war. Well, Miller's action and reaction to that was, okay, then let's start a war. That'll justify what I want to do, and he's already talked about that, and Trump is now hitting at that. That's serving his methodology, and that's serving his agenda. Rubio is serving his agenda. Does Trump know about this? Does he care one way or another? As long as he's lining his pockets, he figures, yeah, if you guys want to do that too, so what? But I don't think he understands exactly the dominoes that are going to fall as a result of these changes.
Bill, do you remember when we were young men and there was a thing called Kremlinology?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the Kremlin, the Politburo in the USSR wasn't very transparent. It was opaque, and
hmm,
so there were literally groups of scholars and analysts who would hang on every word that came out of the Kremlin and interpret it as to what it meant. And it's
yeah.
almost like we need Trumpology, because it's so confusing. On the one hand, there are people in Trump's administration who I think have a very coherent strategy about what they want, whether it is about immigration in the case of Miller, or Cuba in the case of Rubio, or it's the Christian nationalists who are there's another angle to this. I mean,
Yeah.
is Trump a devout evangelical Christian? Well, his behavior would suggest no, uh, but he's allied himself with that part of that power block within the United States, and so they get what they want. And part of that is the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which is it's a fascinating document to read, because it
It's a
is a
frightening
blueprint.
document to read.
It absolutely is, and it's a blueprint to get rid of American government.
Yeah.
That's to shrink it to almost nothing. It's the ultimate, sort of authoritarian, libertarian version of the American government. And so there's that strategy, and all of that is in this big pot of soup, and trying to figure out separate the ingredients of the soup is a difficult process. And I don't think we're far enough along that it's become apparent or clear how that's going to play out. And that's one of the themes I will be watching here at Energy Media in 2026 is what the heck is what is the strategy here? What does the administration want? What does Trump want? How is that all going to play out? And what are the implications for Canada?
and one of the ways to try to determine that, and you're right. I mean, there are people that now are employed to try to analyze what Trump is saying and doing and see what they can make some sense of it. And is he sincere with with the Christian right? Ben Rhodes, in his book, I talked about this a couple of days ago on one of my podcasts. The book he wrote just after he left the Obama administration, and he started comparing other authoritarian governments, and he talked about Viktor Orban in Hungary, who seems to be almost the gold standard for people. Stephen Harper's a big fan of his too, by the way. We should mention. But basically, Orban, as he started, Ben Rhodes said in the book, started out as a small L liberal moderate in Hungary. Didn't have a whole lot of success, and then all of a sudden he embraced the right because he saw that people were pissed off and they're discontented, and that's the easiest way. And the contention here, and I think the argument that Ben Rhodes was making, is that the Trump people are using the same playbook. Donald Trump is not a hard right. Matter of fact, he was a Democrat at one point, good friends with the Clintons and everybody else. And I guess or somebody saw the sea change and said, no, you got to go this way if you want to get elected. They'll fall right in line with you as long as you embrace the flag and as long as you hold the Bible up, even if you hold it up upside down. Those people will be with you come hell or high water, if I can use that phrase, or brimstone. And he's doing that. I don't think for a second he's sincere about it, but that doesn't seem to matter to them. As long as somebody is singing from their song sheet or hymn book, I guess, for the Christian right, he's their hero, and he knows that. And I guess the Steve Bannons and the Millers and others are of a similar mind. He's our guy, and he's allowing us to do whatever the heck we want, so we got to keep him there. Is he going to run again? He might, if he's even alive in 3 years. We don't know that. But will J.D. Vance carry that on? I mean, these guys right now are saying, we've finally made it. We're in the White House. We are in control. And if we have to keep him there to make that happen, so be it. But you wonder now who's pushing the buttons here. Is it Stephen Miller? Is it Steve Bannon? Is it other folks that are basically saying this? Because we already know that Trump will respond, and Trump will sometimes even develop policy based on the last thing that somebody whispered in his ear. And as long as there was a compliment involved in something like that, he's going to go that way. So these guys here really seem to have the hammer now. And you got to wonder just how far they're going to go. I think maybe instead of analyzing Trump, we should be analyzing the people in that inner circle, because they're the ones that seem to be calling the shots here now.
You'll remember, Bill, a couple of interviews ago when you and I were talking about authoritarian libertarianism.
Yeah,
And this is an idea that I picked up in an interview with Professor Trish Roberts Miller of Texas Tech down in the U.S. And what she says is that this is kind of an idea that's been around for 400 years, and it resurfaces every once in a while. McCarthyism in the 1950s would have been an example of it. And essentially the easiest way to understand it is Henry Ford's old saying, you can have your car in any color you want as long as it's black. You can have your freedom in it, as much freedom and any kind of freedom that you want, as long as I agree with it. And if I don't agree with it, then I'm going to use the power of the government to make sure that you can't do what you can't exercise freedom as you see it. And my biggest concern here, Bill, I mean, this is this is kind of part of the cycle, the political cycle in the U.S., and we really hope that the U.S. will get its act together and we'll see a pushback against that. But my biggest concern is that it will infect Canadian politics, and it already has. I mean, we've done enough work now. I was telling you, and I told you in a previous podcast, in September, there was this foreign affairs article about ungoverning by a couple of American professors. And so we've done probably about 15 or 20 interviews now with American academics to understand that idea better. And so it's very clear that Trump is trying to, blow up the machinery of American government, or shrink it so that it's almost inconsequential in American life. What is Danielle Smith doing in Alberta? It's the same playbook applied to a province in a different country. And there are many, many direct lines right to between the MAGA movement and Alberta and the United Conservative Party. And the same approach. I mean, she used the notwithstanding clause to end a teacher strike. She used the notwithstanding clause 3 times to push anti-trans kids legislation through something that was meant to be a very seldom used constitutional tool, she is now using as a tool of political convenience to push through legislation that would be generally unpopular in Alberta. And you see it in public health, you see it in public education, you see it in other government services. She has said flat out, we would prefer that these services be delivered by the private sector, not by the public sector. That goes against, in my opinion, and I've said this in Substack essays, the very idea of Canada. In Canada, my idea of Canada, Bill, is that Canada is relatively flat politically. We're not on the extremes. We're all kind of in the middle, and our idea is we don't have extremes of wealth and income inequality and that sort of thing. We use the machinery of government to redistribute income and make sure that people are taken care of. And that is not the MAGA vision. The MAGA vision is very vertical, where there's, the wealthy at the top and the poor at the bottom, and government shouldn't be taxing excessively and
Yeah.
redistributing, all of that kind of stuff. That's the view from Smith. And I worry that those ideas are beginning to creep already into other provinces. We see Scott Moe in Saskatchewan become very right-wing over the last 3 or 4 years. We see the BC Conservatives under John Rustad before he was ousted. They had a very strong MAGA culture. I worry about that we are setting ourselves up so that 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, we'll see more of these conservative parties that have been taken over by MAGA culture and MAGA agendas. That may seem extreme now, but then, a couple of years ago, we didn't see Trump coming back either.
No, I mean, I know. I just saw some stats on this the other day. I mean, the separatist movement in Alberta, and you've written extensively about that too. By most standards, they say it's really only about 15% of the population. But first of all, they're vocal, and you got to start somewhere. 15 could grow to 30 in a year. You don't know what's going to happen, how people are going to interpret things like that, and of course the influence which is coming from south of us right now to see the success or lack of success that they're going to have. But how is it going to influence what we're doing in this country? There's the governance aspect, as you've talked about here. The other is how can we flex our muscle? I mean, Prime Minister Carney has talked about, okay, the days of reliance on the U.S. economy are gone. We've got to start expanding, and and he's been talking to people in the European Union. He's going to China in a couple of weeks, we're told, talking to India once again, and with eyes wide open. Yes, we have to be very careful because of their influence in our elections, or they're trying to do. But it'd be stupid not to have a trade relationship with them, and he sees that. So he can get over that hurdle. He's I think a certain pragmatist with this, but there's going to be pushback. When we say, okay, we're not sure we want to buy our fighter jets from the Americans, there was immediate pushback. Oh yeah, nice little country you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it, wouldn't it? And that's the attitude here. If we buy the Swedish jets, is there going to be a pushback? If we talk about, we were mentioning earlier about LNG, Russia after 2026, I guess, is no longer be allowed to supply LNG to European countries. Does Canada step up? Premier Canoe in Alberta says, build the Churchill, give us that port, we can ship the stuff over. Forget about the pipeline. They're already talking about alternatives. But the U.S. is the big dog when it comes to LNG. Are they going to say, wait a second, that's our game, you can't play that? There's going to be, I think, a real attempt, and I think that's one of the subplots of 2026 that we have to look forward to, is how are they going to respond to Prime Minister Carney's attempts to try to broaden our trade horizons and our relationships. They don't want that. They don't want us. They don't want to let us out of the front yard. They want to be able to control us, and they've got a great big fence around it. At least they think they do, anyway. And there's going to be, I would think, some attempt to try to curtail what the Prime Minister is doing. I don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to take shape, but they can't be liking what Carney's talking about, and they can't be liking what he's doing.
Well, look at Donald Trump's frequent complaints about Canadians. We're nasty people. We're difficult to negotiate with. And what he means by that, I think, is
that's a badge of honor for me.
Yeah, well, me too. And I think what he means is that Mark Carney goes to the negotiating table and his team goes to the negotiating table and doesn't go on bended knee.
Yeah.
And we don't just give in to what the Americans want. We have our own agenda, and we're willing to stick to it, even if there's some pain associated with that down the road. I would argue, Bill, that the question of building new trading relationships with other regions is the question is, what are we going to trade? And I've interviewed economists, and they say the easy, like if Canada wants to have build a different type of economy, the easiest thing it can do is add value to its natural resources.
Yeah.
So much of what we send out, what we ship down to the U.S. and to other countries, is raw logs to China, raw oil and gas to the United States, raw grains to international markets, on and on and on. Critical minerals is going to be a huge issue. I just interviewed a CEO of a energy company down in Nevada that is making batteries, and we talked about this. And he said there is no way that North America is ever going to have a battery industry, and it needs to have a battery industry, and is a growing one, but it has to include Canada. Canada has all of the minerals that are required. It has the expertise to do the refining and the processing to make battery metals, and to take then the battery metals and make battery cells, and then eventually battery packs. It has all of that. He said Canada has to be a part of it. And so as long as we're adding value, working our way up the value chain, that's the really critical point. And then we're not trading just raw materials out to Asia or whatever. We're adding other values. Now, you talk about Alberta independence. The biggest burr under their saddle is the pipeline. Why do
Yeah.
we have to go on bended knee to British Columbia? Why do we have to ask Canada? You know the way around that, Bill? We've done two interviews now with a company called Northern Native Cooperative, which is Indigenous owned, and it has patented technology to take raw bitumen without any diluent in it, so it's dry, put it in a sea can container in a plastic bladder, ship it over to Asia or Europe or wherever you want. You get 2 or 3 or 4 times the price you would if you sold it to an American refinery. When you get there, you have what's called a hot pit, and you turn the sea can container on the side. You dump the bladder and the bitumen into this pit. They heat it up, mix it with aggregate, with rock, and then you make roads with it. And you don't have to use a tanker. You use a shipping container ship,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it can sail out of Prince Rupert, and you get it there on a rail car, not on a pipeline, and you make more money for it. So if we were clever about this, rather than fighting over a pipeline to refineries that are probably going to begin decline in 5 to 10 years in Asia and Europe and elsewhere, how do we take our raw materials and make something higher value and in more demand and more stable demand, so that we're not going to this boom and bust commodity cycle all the time. And then we could solve some of these political problems because we wouldn't have BC and Alberta fighting, for example. So my point on here, why don't we be clever about this? Why are we just doing the same old thing over and over again with different customers, instead of being clever and thinking, you know what? If we added value to our natural resources, and then we could get it to market in different ways, we could get it to different markets, and it would have all these other benefits, and would add more value and create more, on and on and on. But that's not the conversation we have. Here we are having this silly conversation about being an energy superpower when it means nothing, and there's no chance that we will ever be a superpower. So I think, and I'm a little disappointed, I have to tell you, with Mark Carney, that he has fallen into the incumbency trap and the status quo trap, instead of this idea of being clever and let's do things a different way.
Well, and that remains to be seen just how he's going to approach this. I mean, the pipeline is a separate entity, and I like I say, I have my doubts it's ever going to happen, because the one thing, the key ingredient, the secret sauce in that whole thing is a private sector partner, and ain't nobody knocking on the door these days for that. So we don't even know if that's going to happen. And is Danielle Smith sincere about the commitment to carbon recovery and storage? And we don't know any of that stuff. So that's yet to be happening. But I'm looking for that innovation again. And I know the Prime Minister's talked about that in some of the speeches that he's made. and basically saying, let's bring our industries back here. And it's not unlike what Trump is saying, but I think it's done in a more pragmatic way. It always bothered me, even when I was a kid, when we were starting to learn just about economics in high school, et cetera, that, we have all these raw materials. Canada is the envy of the world. We ship all our raw materials. Somebody makes something of it, and then we buy it back from them. Why don't we do some of that stuff here? I don't know. I don't think we could have a self-sustaining auto industry necessarily in this country. We just don't have the people that can buy the automobiles or the vehicles. That's one thing. But when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to battery production, um, we're looking at the Ring of Fire. We're looking at other areas of this country right now. It's tailor-made for us to say, okay, we're going to do this right now. It's going to take a little time, and it's going to take some investment, capital investment, and so there are going to be some big numbers thrown around, but the payback on that would simply be incredible. And I know when Doug Ford and Carney had that big announcement a couple of weeks ago about the infrastructure for the Ring of Fire, it's basically to build the roads and the infrastructure around there so we can get there. They said, this is so you can ship it to the States. And Carney's response immediately was, there's no guarantee these are going to America. These are our minerals, and we'll decide what we're going to do with them. Okay, you're going to have to back that up at some point. And we know, and you've talked about this, you wrote about this a little while ago, there are American companies that are trying to get a foothold in the Ring of Fire already. They're buying shares in some of the companies that are going to do the exploration and eventually the extraction there. We really got to watch our backs and be careful about that to make sure that we still have control over these things, don't we?
Let me give you an example. There's a company out of Calgary that I love. These guys took drilling technology that was developed in the Alberta oil sands. So where you have to, well, we'll get into the details. Very sophisticated drilling technology. The only example of it in the world. And they use it for advanced geothermal. So essentially, what they do is they drill down 4,000 or 5,000 feet into the earth, and they'll have two well bores, and then they'll join them up, so it's like a radiator. And then they have three or four or five of these bends, and they have a big radiator underground, and they put water down it, and then the water heats up because of the heat down below is conducted through the well bore into the water, warms it up, you get a siphon going, and you get what comes out the other end is water at 200 or 300 C, and then you can either use it for heating or industrial heat, or you can actually turn it into electricity. This is some of the most sophisticated advanced geothermal technology in the world. And the Germans thought so highly of it that they gave them big subsidies to go over and do their first commercial project south of Munich. They're just finishing it up now. And I interviewed their CEO, Mark Fitzgerald, about this. And he said, our next market where we're going to go after is American data centers. So here we have a company that can produce electricity anywhere in the world. It can drill its well bores, and set up a geothermal electricity production right next to a plant. And it's always on, it's dependable, it's dispatchable, it's all the things that nuclear would be, except we own it. Canadians own that technology and that intellectual property. Why do they have to go to the US? Why are we not scaling them up here with programs like the Americans do with their companies so that we can have those data centers in Canada? Why are we not providing industrial heat in Ontario using advanced geothermal? Why are we always going out and looking elsewhere instead of looking to our own homegrown technology, which is right on the cusp of being commercial? What it needs is help, scaling up. That's what the Americans do really, really well. They have, these vast pools of capital that nobody else on the planet has. So when a company is ready, like ever, is they pour capital into it and they scale it up. And there are other examples like this and I gave you one with the asphalt binder exports. There are all of these kinds of examples through the Canadian economy that we could get behind and create Canadian champions and build industries and industrial clusters around, and it would add value to our natural resources, and it would develop new industries. We could scale up, do this national power grid using advanced geothermal, on and on and on. if we get out of our incumbency and our status quo thinking, and we start looking around and going, hey, how are other countries doing this, and what are their strategies, why are they doing it, instead of doing the same old thing over and over again.
Well, and I saw that story a couple of weeks ago, and the Germans bought the technology, and they were just amazed by it. And my first reaction is, why aren't we making a big deal about this? I mean, this is the future. This is incredible, and it's like, it's not even a headline story in most areas. And I thought that was very telling, I suppose. But as we've talked about in the past, to your point about trying to find people that can support this sort of stuff, yeah, government's got to play a role in this. But there are billions, if not trillions of dollars of investment dollars out there right now, whether it's pension funds or anything else, they're looking to invest. And, uh, but I know they're looking for stability. We talked about that at the beginning of our conversation. So that's a factor that has to be addressed, certainly. But the money is out there. If you can say, here's my idea, this is a fabulous idea, they're there and they're ready to listen. So how do you create that sense of stability in a very unstable world these days because of what's happening, obviously economically, and what's happening south of the border politically? And to David Coletto's point right now, we're a little nervous. And when people are nervous, they don't want to throw a whole lot of money on the table and say, here, I'm all in. We got to have to get over that, don't we?
So a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Portuguese entrepreneurs who announced a series of AI data centers in Alberta. And the government made a big deal out of it. And you know how it is in journalism, Bill. You go, oh, the government claims X. I'm going to go test that. I'm
Yeah.
going to go interview the folks and find out what's really going on. Well, it turned out that, as far as I could tell from the interviewing the CEO and their technical advisors and their own technical manager, this is a legitimate deal. These folks know what they're doing. They have some Swiss capital backing them, and so on. And one of the things that came up in conversation was, why Canada? And, why didn't you could do this any place? You could do it in Europe. You could do it in the United States. Why are you coming to Canada? Well, there are a bunch of technical reasons. Like, if you want to cool a data center, doing it in Edmonton, where, it's cool, it's a cooler climate, is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And in the short term, they have to do it with natural gas because they can't do it reliably enough with renewables. So fair enough. You got lots of gas in Alberta. But here is one of the important things. Canada is viewed on the world stage as a stable democracy with well-established laws, well-established institutions to support the economy. And we underestimate the value of simple things like having a legal system, a judicial system, where businesses can hash out disagreements. Like, if two businesses are, they disagree over a contract, they can go and get a fair hearing, and the results can be enforced, and so on. That's not true in a lot of places in the world. And capital wants certainty and stability. It wants rules that it can count on. And that is increasingly an advantage for Canada. And we should be promote. Well, in fact, we do promote it. And Carney promotes it, in fairness.
Yeah.
But so even though we have a precarity mindset, as Coletto says, and I think that's true, it's also true that Canada is a bastion of stability in a sea of instability. And that gives us an advantage that we should take advantage of it. And we should then couple that with this clever strategy of adding value to our resources and doing things differently than we've done in the past.
Which is why I guess so many people are looking at the coming year, 2026, as pivotal. As you say, we've got a guy in the Prime Minister's office right now that gets it. Been there, done that. Bank of Canada governor, Bank of UK governor, and he understands that, and he's got those connections, of course, through his financial experience and now his political experience. Now, of course, it's you've got the concept, you've got the players. It's a matter of turning this into a situation where people are going to say, I'm going to put that money on the table, private sector money, other government money, and things of this nature. So do you, just as we wrap up the hour here and start looking forward to 2026, Are you optimistic about Canada's chances of increasing our profile and divesting ourselves not totally from the American economy, but creating our own economies again within our own borders here to try to make up for that the dependence that we've had for so long? That, hey, we can do that here. Let's do that here. Instead of saying, well, yeah, but we're Canadians, we'll let somebody else do it. No, we're going to do it. We're going to build it here. We're going to develop it here. We've got the expertise. Time and time again, Canadians have shown that. It's just a matter, do we have the dedication to make it happen in this country? Is the political will there? And more importantly, is the public will there to make this happen?
I have very mixed feelings, Bill, and I'm kind of biased because we report on the energy sector,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of I see things often through the lens of the energy transition at the global level. So on the one hand, I'm kind of optimistic because I think Mark Carney is the right guy. Out of all the candidates that we could have had as prime minister, best that he be at the helm right now. I think that's a very good thing. But I also worry, on the other hand, that, and I've got a Substack essay coming out about that today, in fact, arguing that one of the mistakes that Carney is making is he's still looking at energy and the economy through the climate lens. We keep coming back to, well, we have to lower emissions. And he says this over and over again in interviews. We have to lower emissions. We have to combat climate. Oh, and by the way, we can do that with clean energy and we can have all of these other benefits. He's got it the wrong way around. Right now, and this is the way why China's been so successful, it's all about technology change. It's all about better electric technology. It's all about industry. It's all about capital investment. Oh, and by the way, if you invest in clean energy, you lower emissions. And so I've come to the conclusion we should stop worrying about the industrial emitters carbon tax. We should stop worrying about emissions caps, all of that stuff. We should just go in the direction of electrification, which is where the world is going. And we should get away from this obsession with selling raw oil and gas, LNG onto international markets that are set to decline. We should take a different approach to this. And I see too much from Carney still in the energy space of reinforcing the status quo. Oh, we're going to do pipeline. Oh, we're going to do more LNG plants. Lots of arguments against that. So I have some confidence. I'm feeling optimistic that we got the right guy at the helm, but he needs to make a few bubbles to the right or left. He has to make a change in strategy because we're not, in my opinion, we're not quite going in the right direction yet.
Is this a pivotal year? Do you see that there's going to be some strides in that direction in 2026?
I think every year from here on out for the foreseeable future is going to be a pivotal year. There is no more status quo anymore. The global economy, the global energy system is being significantly disrupted by new technologies, by the sixth industrial revolution, as they call it, where you've got materials and AI and so on. All of that is upending the economic order. We're in for a period of instability as that disruption works its way through various industries. Look at the auto industry. China is absolutely disrupted the OEMs over the last 3 to 4 years. And that's going to continue. And that has implications all up and down the supply chain, upstream and downstream. That is just one microcosm. We're seeing that in almost every industry. So I think Canadians have to buckle up. We have become very comfortable with the economy that we built over the last, century and a half. And it's given us a lifestyle that we really, we've kind of taken for granted, a democracy that we've taken for granted. All of that is being disrupted. And we have to get engaged, start thinking about doing things differently, defending the principles and the values that we hold dear in our politics and for government. And we have to have these conversations. And Bill, I got to say, you and Madeline, I appreciate so much the fact that you host these kind of conversations on your podcast. And we just saw the other day that I think it was Bloomberg was making the prediction that podcasts are going to become the dominant form of media in the coming years, and already are. So you're having the right kind of conversations, Bill, and we have to hash these things out. And it's not happening in the mainstream media, but if we have enough of these, then maybe we can get a new consensus about what our economy has to look like, what our trade strategy is, what our democracy, looks like, and how we want government to operate. So this is yeah, it is a pivotal time.
Hmm.
Which way are we going to go? That's up to us, but we have to have the conversation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it as well, and the prime minister's reaching out to the Chinese government and to find out what's going on there too. Uh, we tend oftentimes, I guess, to not understand exactly what's happening, because they're not as transparent as other governments. Clearly, I can remember, I guess it was maybe my last year on council. That's almost 20 years ago now when I was on Hamilton City Council, and the debate about light rail transit was coming up. But by the way, they still have not built in Hamilton. Talk about dragging your heels. But there was a Chinese company that came forward after our mayor had been on a mission over to China and talked to some of the officials there. He says, "We'll build it for you. We'll have it up for you in about a year and a half." And they weren't kidding. I mean, because they'd done it in other places. That's the Chinese attitude. And again, they decided not to do that. But we can learn a lot. There's a lot we have to be very careful and wary about with the Chinese, but there's a lot we can learn from them about accelerating our economic growth. Mind you, it's a different model. I get that, and there's the element about government intervention, et cetera, like that. They can throw a hospital up in 2 weeks, or it'd take us 15 years to build it. And I'm not crazy about the way that the labor market, et cetera, is handled down there, but we can, I think, learn from their models about exactly how to get things done. It could be beneficial to us as long as we go in with eyes wide open. I'm looking forward to 2026 to see just how this government is going to do this. And it's one thing to say let's be bold, and I believe the prime minister when he says he's going to be bold. He's going to talk about these innovative ideas. The biggest problem here is going to sell it to a public that are, as you mentioned, and as Dave Coletto mentioned in his essay, are a little apprehensive right now. Until they can see that stability. We kind of like do we want to take one more foot under the ice there? Is it thin there, or is it going to be solid? And until we get an answer to that, it's going to be very tough for politicians, I think, to sell that idea. So I'm looking forward to it too, and I'm looking forward to our conversations too. It's been just fabulous having you on the podcast through the course of 2025 here and shedding some light on these things. This is one of the things I'm one of those refugees from mainstream media that's now doing the podcast thing, and I'm loving it. This has been a great year for us. But what I've loved about this is it gives us an opportunity, like you and I just did, to delve into stuff. And not just to scratch the surface with a 4 or 5 minute interview because you have to go and do something else, or we're gonna make sure we cover all the bases. And you're fabulous. You've been doing a great job with that, with Energy Media, and informing the public. And I agree with what Bloomberg said. This has opened up a whole new information source for people, and it's one of our jobs, I think, to make sure that people understand that it's here. And as I've always reminded our viewers, educate yourself. An educated opinion will really help move the dialogue along here. And at this point right now, we as public, I think, have a role to play in that. To try to educate and bring these stories forward. And you guys do that with Energy Media, and we certainly do that with our podcast here too. So I am optimistic. I'm a glasses half full guy, but I think there's some pretty positive vibes happening right here too. It's going to push a little bit, and there's going to be some pushback on that too, but we'll see how it goes. But I'm looking forward to the conversations you and I are going to have over the next 12 months about how this works for this country, and certainly on the global situation as well.
I want to leave you with this thought, Bill. There's a lot of talk now about how AI is going to undermine the meaning of truth. And because you can deep fake anything,
Hmm.
you can make up anything, and how do you know that what you see or hear is actually true? And so there's a lot of anxiety in the news media industry, but I think that for folks like you and I, it'll be the best thing that ever happened to us, because when you build a reputation for bringing expert opinion to the conversation, when you demonstrate that you've done your work and you're a reasonable commentator, people come to trust you. And so I think that citizens will be turning more and more to voices like you and I because they trust it. They know that when they see a conversation like you and I are having now, it's not two AI figures. It's two people who have done their homework and have thought through these issues and are having a rational conversation about it. And I think that that's going to be in greater, and there'll be less and less of it over time. And those who do it and do it well will actually benefit, and it'll be a benefit to society as a consequence.
Well, and as I've always said on the show too, I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to get you to think, and look at these issues, because that's going to be beneficial to all of us. Markham, thanks as always again, not just for today, but for all the great work, and all the best to you and yours in 2026. I look forward to our next conversations.
Well, and Happy New Year to you and Madeline and all of your viewers. This has been great. I'm looking forward to 2026, Bill.
Me too. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the notification bell there too, and share the word, okay, and the word of what we're doing. And thanks to all the subscribers. As Markham and I have talked about in the past, your support through subscriptions really helps us to continue the work that we're doing here on these podcasts, and we really do appreciate that. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work she does producing this. Until next time, Happy New Year and best of luck to everybody for 2026. I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.